Hey everybody, today we are going to paint another landscape with gouache. It's gonna be another colorful painting, and you can see right now I am using a bit of tape in my sketchbook. This is washi tape. You can use any tape that's not too sticky. And then I'm starting to sketch the landscape. It's gonna be rather simple, and we are just mapping out where everything is gonna go. Essentially, we have a few hills and some type of road or path, and then the main focal point, which is a house. And I wanted this to be in a similar style and color scheme as the landscape that I already did on the right side, so that both of those pages would fit together. And yeah, I am kind of adding a few details, but not too much. I'm using a rather rough paper here. Personally, I would recommend one that is slightly less textured than this one. This paper, it works for watercolors. It also kind of works for gouache, but I prefer a bit of a smoother paper. So if you have one that has less texture, then I would say go ahead and use that. I just wanted to fill this sketchbook. It's almost done now. This is the Etcher Perfect Sketchbook. They call it the Perfect Sketchbook. I mean, it's very subjective what you think is perfect. It's not bad at all. I just think the paper's too rough, essentially. And you can see the sketch is really coming together now. I have a lot of bushes. Currently, these are clouds that I'm sketching out right now, and more towards the front we have bushes. And I kind of cross-hatched, scribbled in one of those bushes so I would know where the bushes end and where the clouds begin, so I know what colors to use. And we also have this path with this fence. I kind of regretted the fence a little bit. If you're more of a beginner, maybe don't add the fence because that gave me a bit of trouble, but it's not too bad. And I'm starting to use my colors. I'm using non-realistic colors with this one as well, like I did in the other page. I started with this pink tone. I still had, I think, a few of the colors on my palette from the last painting, and so I was using basically the same ones. I recommend that if you follow this tutorial, play around with colors that you like. Unless it's a course, in my courses, I go way more step by step. But in my tutorials, I don't like to tell you, mix this paint 50% of that and 50% of that. I want you to be able to just mix colors that you like and don't put so much pressure on yourself to recreate exactly what I have. But if you need a little bit more guidance for that, then I really recommend my courses because they're just longer, essentially, so they go way more into depth that I can here on a YouTube tutorial. What are you looking for? I'm looking for an intermediate level illustration course. Are you also looking for an intermediate level illustration course? Oh, what's that? This is my brand new Magic Farm World course, in which I'm gonna teach you how you can recreate this magical illustration, and I'm also showing you how you can create your own creative illustrations. This course is perfect for you if you want to take your art to the next level and improve your skills. And if you sign up before May 24th, then you can use the code EARLYBIRDFARM to get 35% off the course. I will leave the link in the description, so make sure to check it out. Now let's continue with the video. And I mixed this blue tone for the sky and just added a bunch of colors together that I like. I use a lot of colors in these pieces, but I also make sure that those colors are not too saturated, because if they're really vibrant, then it can look very cartoony and very clowny very quickly. So I do make sure that they're not extremely vibrant. If your color is a little bit too saturated, then I recommend the easier version for total beginners is to add some gray, which could be black and white added together, or you could also add a little bit of the color that's opposite on the color wheel. So if I have my blue here, I could, for example, add an orange tone, or if I have a green tone, I could add a little bit of a red or also an orange tone, something that's on the other side of the color wheel. It doesn't have to be the exact complementary color, but if it is far away from the color that you already have and you just add a little bit, then you can desaturate your color. We have this very cool dark green tone right now for the more foreground, not really foreground, but this area here. It's a grass and bushes. It's not really set in stone where the grass ends and where the bushes begin. It really doesn't matter. This is supposed to be as simplified as possible. I'm just coloring in everything right now and kind of spreading around my colors a little bit. So whenever I use a color in an illustration, I like to use it in multiple areas. So with the pink, I used it for the hill in the background, some of the bushes in the background, and the ones in the foreground. Then the green I also spread around a little bit. And now I am mixing my next color. This is a very dark purple tone now, so I, for the purple, obviously use a red and a blue tone. You can also add in some black to make it darker. Some people really hate using black, but I, especially with gouache, use it quite a lot because with gouache, the darker colors dry lighter and the lighter colors dry darker. So essentially, you're losing a lot of the contrast. And if you want to have contrast in your piece, you have to go as dark and as light as you can. So I am often adding a little bit of black to my color so that it is as dark as it can possibly be. I could also add a little bit of a complementary color to darken my color. So I could use red and blue and then also add maybe a little bit of an orange in there to make it even darker. And if you manage to get the exact right mix, it will darken your color. But I find it way easier to just add a little bit of black. And also as an added bonus, the black is going to take the vibrancy down a little bit, which I personally want to do because I use a lot of colors anyways, like I said, and I don't want it to go overboard. I hope that all of this explaining makes a little bit of sense to you. I, like I said, go into detail when it comes to these things in my courses. And I, again, with the dark purple, spread it around my painting in different areas. I used it for the tree, I used it for the bushes, in the more foreground and more towards the background where the house is. And here I have this pink tone. It's not my favorite color, I have to admit. But I wanted something that kind of goes with the piece and with the colors that we already have. I did go over that again later on and turned it into a more beigey tone because I really didn't like the pink for the path here. And then I used a purple tone for the roof as well. This one is a little bit lighter than the one we had previously so that it doesn't completely blend into the other purple. So this one doesn't have as much black. And I find in order to mix good purple tones, I use a cool red tone Like in my Winsor & Newton set, it's a primary red. It's often quinacridone red or just a very cool red tone that is almost like a pink tone. And I mix that with a blue tone that goes more into the purples as well, like an ultramarine blue versus a very greeny blue. I would not use a green blue like a cyan or even a turquoise. I wouldn't use that. I would use ultramarine and then a cool pinkish red tone to mix a good purple tone. And in this case, we have very warm purple tones. So that means that I added in more of the red pink tone versus the blue tone. So then we get a way more red purple, obviously, if we use more red. And I just played around with those shades or hues. Essentially, I did different variations of the purples and pinks, and that made a cohesive color palette. Honestly, I think that the green now really stands out more than I had planned it would, because I added in so much purple. But I think in the end it does come together quite well, and I think I almost like this piece more than the one that I did on the right. So I'm really curious to see how well this video performs and if you guys like it or not. I also added some green here in the tree because I now had the thought that the green was kind of out of place, so I had to ground it more into the piece, and I think that really did the trick, made it a little bit better. And I just made sure to color in my sections and not go too much overboard with the details. I really have to stop myself at some point to not go in too much. For the smaller details, I'm using my nail brush here. It's really, really handy for things like that. It's very annoying to have to dip it into the paint and into the water so often because it's so small. But because it's so small, it's so good for details. And I also mixed a lighter version of the green tone, a very dirty green tone here. And I am coloring in the other leaf parts so that it's not all the same color, and we have a little bit of variation and a little bit of contrast as well here in the different sections of the tree, essentially. And I also tried to give a little bit of contrast to those leafy parts in front of our grass. And so I tried to make a little bit of a gradient here from a lighter to a darker green. I don't know how successful that was. That's probably my least favorite part of the piece, but it's okay. It doesn't bother me too much. I also used that dirty lighter green in the background for the little hill there, and also added a section here in the foreground, again with the same intention to spread around the color as much as I can so that it looks a little bit more cohesive. And here I am mixing my beige tone, and I used it for the house at first. I added in more white later on because it was a little bit too dark for my taste. And if you can remember, with gouache, the lighter colors dry darker. So if you have a light color, then make sure it is always a few shades lighter than what you actually want, because it is going to dry darker. I don't know if there's any gouache brands that don't do that, But with every single gouache that I've tried so far, that happens. It's just part of it. And I mean, it is a bit of a challenge to work with the colors drying differently. And I mean, it sounds like it's very annoying. And sometimes it can be a little bit tricky. But honestly, I kind of like the fact that gouache does that, because in the end, the look is always a little bit softer. And I tend to go really heavy with my colors sometimes and with my contrast. And gouache sort of counteracts that a little bit by the way that it dries. And so my piece always looks a little bit more dreamy and soft than what I had actually planned to. And in a way, I really like that. And I think that's something that draws people to gouache, as well as just the ability to blend it and layer it. And yeah, it has a lot of really cool things to it, but I also really like the look that it gives. And if you're using acrylic gouache, for example, it has a very similar look to the traditional water-based gouache, and it also looks kind of soft. And it's probably a reason why people use acrylic gouache over regular acrylics sometimes, because it looks very matte, it looks very soft, and I think it adds sort of like a filter onto your piece. Here I was trying to make the path a little bit better. I sped that up quite a bit here, because this did not end up looking like that. You can also see how differently it dried here. And then I finally changed that color. Sometimes you just need to change the color of one section of your piece, and you might like the entire piece a lot more. And this is what happened here, because it just looked so off to me to have this pink tone for the path. And when I had the beige tone in the house, I felt like it wasn't so out of place on the path anymore. This is just basically a little bit of a darker version than the beige we have on the house. And here I am using a very light pink tone for the clouds in the background. I have no idea if you can tell the difference between the bushes and the clouds in this piece. Probably not completely, because they look very similar, but I don't mind it. I think it adds a little bit to the dreamy and surreal vibe that all of this has. It's not supposed to look realistic whatsoever, and it doesn't. And I like those shapes, those very round clouds and bushes, and I play around with that a lot. And I think this is something that I really want to explore more as a style. And yeah, this is why I did that. And now I am starting with the fence. This was probably the hardest part of the piece. This is why I said if you're a complete beginner, maybe skip the fence, because it is really hard to get a super thin line with a light color. When you have white in it, it's much, much harder to get thin lines with that than it is with dark colors. So if you do the fence, for example, with a darker color, it might look much better, much more easily. And if you're using a light color, it's just a thicker paint consistency. You need a thicker consistency for a light color to show up. If you're using a darker color, you can wash it down a lot. You can add a lot of water to it, and it's so much easier to spread it around. And it doesn't matter because it's a darker color anyways, and it's just gonna darken up everything. But if you're using a lighter color on top of a darker one, you have to use a much thicker consistency and really have to cake that onto the piece and make sure that it covers whatever you're painting on. And that makes it so much harder to have clean and thin lines, which is why I wasn't extremely happy with the fence. But it's for example, with the windows, it was much easier to do the dark part I did do outlines with lighter colors as well. This can also be tricky if you want those to be super thin. I recommend really taking your time with this if you decide to do something like that. Here I am already removing the tape. We are almost done. I'm still gonna do a few final touches on the windows, but other than that, the piece is pretty much done. It's a rather simple one, but I do recommend taking your time with it if you follow along. Don't rush it too much. And especially with the small details like the ones here in the windows, really take your time with that to sort of make it look nice. And here it is, the finished piece, and also next to the other one, finished page spread. If you want to see more gouache painting tutorials like this one, then check out this video next.